The ballroom at Renfrew House had been decorated within an inch of its life, and Miss Adelaide Fenn had opinions about every single inch of it. "The orchestra is flat," she murmured to her cousin Louisa, both of them tucked into the shadow of a large potted fern near the back wall. Not badly flat, just enough to be noticeable to anyone who has ever heard a violin played correctly. "You cannot possibly tell that from here," Louisa whispered back, though she was smiling. "I can tell everything from here," Adelaide said. "That is the entire advantage of being invisible." She was 24, with pale blonde hair pinned simply, blue eyes that missed nothing, and a gown of soft grey muslin that had been chosen specifically because it drew no attention whatsoever. She had attended 11 balls this season. She had danced at exactly 2 of them. She had become, by her own quiet admission, something of an expert in the architecture of being overlooked. It did not bother her as much as people assumed it should. "Look at the flowers," she continued, warming to her subject now. "Hothouse roses, clearly imported at extraordinary expense, arranged by someone with absolutely no sense of proportion. And the refreshment table is a disaster. Lukewarm champagne and biscuits that have clearly been sitting out since 4 o'clock. Adelaide." "I am simply observing." "You are composing a review," Louisa said. "You always do this. If you wrote it down, you could publish it and ruin someone's evening properly instead of just amusing me." "I've considered it," Adelaide admitted. "The Renfrew Gazette, a weekly column dedicated entirely to the failures of the ton's entertaining. You would need a pseudonym." "I would need very little else. I'm already invisible. I've simply never monetized it." Louisa laughed, and Adelaide felt the particular satisfaction of having made someone laugh in a room that otherwise did not know she existed. "You could dance, you know," Louisa said, when the laughter subsided. "Mr. Pellington asked after you not 20 minutes ago. He seemed quite hopeful." "Mr. Pellington has asked after me at every ball this season and danced with Miss Carstairs at every single one of them," Adelaide said. "I am a polite formality he performs before pursuing the actual object of his interest. I do not mind it. It leaves me free to observe." "You always say that you do not mind it." "Because I genuinely do not," Adelaide said, though even as she said it, something small and unexamined shifted beneath the words. "My mother despaired of me after my 2nd season. She has largely given up hoping I will be noticed and settled instead for hoping I will not embarrass the family. I have found this a considerably more achievable standard." "That is a very sad way to describe your own life." "It is a very practical way to describe my own life," Adelaide corrected. "There is a difference, and I've found the practical version considerably easier to live inside." Louisa did not look entirely convinced, but she let the subject drop, returning her attention to the dance floor, and Adelaide returned to her observations, because observing, unlike hoping, had never once disappointed her. "And the host himself," Adelaide said, gesturing with her fan toward the far side of the room, where the Duke of Renfrew stood receiving guests with the stiff formality of a man enduring rather than enjoying his own party, "is, I am reliably informed, considered the most eligible man in England, which only tells you how low the standards of eligibility have fallen." "Adelaide." He has not smiled once. Not at the Pembertons, not at Lady Ashford, not even at his own sister. I begin to wonder if his face is simply constructed differently from other men's. "Adelaide," Louisa said again, with considerably more urgency. What? He is standing directly behind you. Adelaide went very still. She turned, slowly, and found herself looking up into a pair of grey eyes that were, in fact, not entirely incapable of expression. They were, at this particular moment, alight with something that looked remarkably like suppressed amusement. "Your Grace," she said. "Miss Fenn," he said. He knew her name. She had not expected that. "I believe you were about to comment on my refreshments." "I had finished commenting on your refreshments," Adelaide said, deciding that dignity required she not retreat. "I had moved on to your face." Beside her, Louisa made a small, strangled sound. "And what," the Duke said, "is your professional verdict on my face?" "Unsmiling," Adelaide said, "possibly permanently. I'd begun to theorize a medical cause." There was a long pause. Then, to her genuine astonishment, the Duke of Renfrew laughed, a short, surprised sound, as though it had escaped before he could stop it. "No medical cause," he said. "Simply very little reason, until tonight, to use the muscles required." "That is either the saddest thing I've heard all evening," Adelaide said, "or the most successful flirtation anyone has attempted on me, and I genuinely cannot decide which." "Perhaps both," he said. He found her again 20 minutes later, having apparently abandoned his receiving line duties to his sister. "I've been thinking about the orchestra," he said, appearing at her elbow without preamble. "Have you? You said it was flat." "I asked the conductor. He confirmed the second violin has a cold and has been compensating poorly all evening." Adelaide stared at him. "You asked the conductor?" "I wish to know if you are correct." "Was I?" "Entirely," he said. "It is rather unsettling." "Most people find criticism unsettling, Your Grace. I would not take it personally." "I do not mean the criticism," he said. "I mean that I have hosted 4 balls this season, and not one guest has noticed anything beyond the champagne." "You noticed the violin?" "I notice most things," Adelaide said. "It is generally considered a flaw in a young woman. I have been told so by several mothers, including my own." "I do not consider it a flaw," he said. Something in his voice had changed, gone quieter, and Adelaide found she did not entirely know what to do with the way he was looking at her. Directly, without the polished social distance she had watched him maintain with every other guest that evening. "You should return to your receiving line," she said. "Your sister cannot manage 4 earls indefinitely." "No," he agreed, "she cannot. But I find I am considerably more interested in continuing this conversation than in greeting a 5th earl." "That seems like a poor strategy for a man hosting a ball." "It is an excellent strategy," he said, "for a man who has just discovered the only honest person in the room." His mother summoned Adelaide for tea 4 days later, which Adelaide understood, the moment the invitation arrived, to be considerably less innocent than it appeared. "My son has not stopped mentioning you," the Dowager Duchess said, pouring tea with the brisk efficiency of a woman who did not believe in wasting time on pleasantries. "Which is alarming, because my son does not mention anyone. He has opinions about parliamentary committees and his tenant farms and very little else, until apparently last Tuesday." I am not entirely certain what I am meant to say to that, Your Grace. Adelaide said, You are meant to tell me whether you intend to be sensible about this, the Duchess said, or whether you intend to talk yourself out of it the way I understand you talk yourself out of most attention. My son's housekeeper has a niece who is at the ball. Word travels. Adelaide set down her teacup carefully. I was not aware I had a reputation for talking myself out of attention. You have built an entire persona around being unnoticed, Miss Fenn. I am simply asking whether you intend to continue that persona indefinitely, or whether you might consider that being noticed is not, in fact, a catastrophe. It has generally worked to my advantage, Adelaide said. Invisibility asks very little of a person, and gives very little in return, the Duchess said, not unkindly. I am 71 years old. I have buried a husband and outlived 2 sisters. I've learned that the things worth having generally require being seen. She studied Adelaide over the rim of her teacup. My son is hosting a small dinner Thursday. I would like you to attend. Your Grace, I do not think. I am not asking whether you think, Miss Fenn. I am informing you of the arrangement. The dinner on Thursday was, by Adelaide's private assessment, executed with considerably more competence than the ball had been. The soup is excellent, she said, before she could stop herself, halfway through the first course. I told the cook to attend to the seasoning specifically, the Duke said from his place beside her, which she had noted upon arrival was no accident of the seating arrangement. I understand it was found wanting at the ball. I never said. You said the refreshments were a disaster, he said. I assumed the principle extended. You have been collecting my criticisms, Adelaide said slowly. I've been taking notes, he admitted. It seemed the most efficient way to improve. That is either deeply flattering or deeply alarming. I've been told it is both, he said, with the same dry note she was beginning to recognize as specifically his. Across the table, his sister Lady Margaret leaned toward Louisa with the particular delight of someone who has found an ally. He has rewritten the entire seating chart for this dinner, she said. Twice. I have never seen him take this much trouble over a guest list in his life. Margaret, the Duke said. I am simply observing, Margaret said, echoing, without realizing it, the exact words Adelaide had used at the ball. Adelaide caught the Duke's eye. Something passed between them, amusement and something else beneath it that she was not yet ready to name. You are seeing the Duke of Renfrew with some regularity, Adelaide's mother observed the following morning, not looking up from her correspondence. Mrs. Hartley mentioned it to me at church, as though I were the last person in London to know my own daughter's affairs. We have spoken at several of the same events, Adelaide said carefully. Several events, Adelaide, is not how Mrs. Hartley described it. She described it as considerably more than several. Her mother set down her pen. I've spent 6 years watching you make yourself comfortable with the idea that no one would look twice at you, and I've not known how to argue you out of it, because you argue rather better than I do about nearly everything. I'm asking you now, plainly, whether you intend to let yourself be looked at. I do not know that I have decided, Adelaide admitted. You have decided, her mother said. You simply have not permitted yourself to say so aloud. I've watched you decide things for 24 years, Adelaide. You do it with your face long before you do it with your words. She returned to her letter, though her tone softened. Your father would have liked him, I think. He always said the cleverest women were wasted on men who wanted agreement rather than honesty. Adelaide thought of her father, 3 years gone now, and of the quiet, careful years since, during which her mother had managed a household on considerably less than it required, and never once complained of it where Adelaide could hear. "I've been afraid," Adelaide said, "that wanting something would mean admitting how much it would cost to lose it." "That is the most honest thing you have said to me in a year," her mother said. "It is also no way to live a life. Go and be looked at, Adelaide. I believe you may find you survive it rather well." "You should know," the Duke said 3 weeks later, as they walked the length of his library while a quiet rain moved against the tall windows, "that I have begun to dread my own social calendar, specifically because it interferes with seeing you." "That is a very dramatic statement for a Tuesday afternoon," Adelaide said. "I am aware. I find I'm no longer entirely in control of when I say dramatic things." He stopped walking. "I attended 4 balls last season and remembered none of them. I will remember every single evening since the one where you criticized my orchestra. I do not know what to do with that information except tell you about it." Adelaide looked at the books lining the walls, anywhere but at him, because looking at him directly while he said things like that felt dangerously close to admitting something she had not yet decided how to feel. "I've spent 6 seasons being unremarkable on purpose," she said. "It is a habit I am not certain how to break." "I am not asking you to be remarkable," he said. "I am telling you that I have found you entirely remarkable already, in a grey dress, standing behind a fern, insulting my flowers." "They deserved it," Adelaide said. "The proportions were genuinely terrible." He laughed, the real laugh, the one she had earned twice now and found she wanted to earn again and again. They walked the gardens at Renfrew House the following Sunday, Louisa trailing a careful, diplomatic distance behind them with the air of a chaperone who had decided her presence was largely ceremonial. "Your mother believes I talk myself out of attention," Adelaide said, watching a pair of swans move across the ornamental lake. She said it rather directly, over tea, as though it were an established medical fact. "My mother says most things rather directly," James said. "It is occasionally exhausting and almost always correct." Was she correct about this? He considered the question seriously, which he had come to recognize as one of his particular qualities. He rarely answered her lightly, even when a light answer would have been easier. "I think," he said, "that you built a very good argument for yourself a long time ago about why being overlooked was safer than being disappointed. I do not think it was ever true. I think it was simply the explanation that hurt least." Adelaide was quiet for a moment, watching the swans. That is uncomfortably perceptive for a Sunday afternoon. "I've had a great deal of practice observing you," he said. "You once told me observation was your particular talent. I find I've developed something of the same habit." "You are imitating me." "I am improving myself," he said, "using the best example available." She laughed, and he reached for her hand, without announcing the gesture, simply taking it as though it were already an established fact between them, and she let him, and neither of them mentioned it, though both of them noticed. "Come to the theatre with me Friday," he said. "Properly, not by accident." "As what?" as the only person in London whose opinion of my taste I've ever actually wanted," he said. The theatre box was draped in deep green velvet, and Adelaide spent the first half of the evening watching the Duke watch her rather than the stage. "You are not paying attention to the performance," she observed during the interval. "I am paying attention to your reaction to the performance," he said. "It is considerably more interesting. You made a face during the second scene that suggested the leading actress had committed a personal offense against you." "Her diction was appalling," Adelaide said. "I could not understand a single word of the soliloquy." "I understood every word. I simply could not tell you what any of them meant, because I was watching you not understand them." "That is not a compliment, Your Grace." "It was meant as one," he said, "imperfectly delivered. I am told I require practice." "Who told you that?" "My mother, at considerable length. She has opinions about my delivery of compliments that she shares whether or not I have asked." Adelaide laughed, and across the theatre, in box after gilded box, heads turned briefly toward the sound before returning to their own conversations. She did not notice them. She was looking at him. "He has asked cook to prepare 3 different soups for Thursday's dinner," Lady Margaret announced to Adelaide the following week, settling into the drawing-room at Renfrew House with the satisfied air of someone delivering excellent gossip, because he could not decide which one you would prefer, and rather than simply asking you, he has decided to present all 3 as though this were an entirely normal household practice. "That seems like a great deal of soup," Adelaide said. "It is a tremendous amount of soup," Margaret agreed. "I've lived in this house for 26 years and never once seen my brother concern himself with the contents of a single meal, let alone 3. You have broken something in him, Miss Fenn, and I find I am profoundly grateful for it." "I have broken him in the very best way," Margaret said. "He used to enter rooms like a man attending his own funeral. Now he enters rooms looking for you specifically, and his entire face changes when he finds you. I've begun keeping a private record of it. It is the most entertaining thing that has happened in this house in a decade." Adelaide felt warmth climb into her cheeks. "You should not encourage him." "I should encourage him considerably more than I already do," Margaret said. "Someone in this family ought to be happy, and for years it has looked rather unlikely that it would be him." Lady Cressida Hartwell had been the obvious choice for the Duke of Renfrew for the better part of 2 seasons, and she made certain everyone at the Ashworth Garden party remembered this fact. "Miss Fenn," she said, arriving at Adelaide's side with a smile that managed to convey both warmth and warning simultaneously. "How delightful that you have been included in so many of the Duke's recent engagements. Quite the change from previous seasons." "People do tend to notice things eventually," Adelaide said. "Do they?" Cressida's eyes swept over Adelaide's gown with deliberate, unhurried assessment. "I've known James for years. We were nearly engaged once, you know, before his father died, and everything became so complicated. I do hope you understand what you are stepping into with a man like that. He has very particular requirements, a certain standard he has always maintained." "I imagine he is capable of deciding his own standards," Adelaide said. "Of course." Cressida's smile widened, sharpened. "I only worry that a woman with your particular reputation for, what is the word, observing from the shadows, might find the actual spotlight rather more difficult than she anticipates. It is a great deal of attention being a duchess. One cannot simply hide behind a fern when it becomes inconvenient. Adelaide felt the words land precisely where they were aimed. She kept her expression composed with considerable effort. "I shall manage," she said. Cressida departed with a final, lingering smile, and Adelaide stood very still in the garden, breathing carefully, until the Duke appeared at her side moments later. "Cressida has been talking to you," he said. "She came to offer her good wishes," Adelaide said. "I can imagine precisely what form those wishes took." He studied her face. "Adelaide, whatever she said, she is not entirely wrong," Adelaide said quietly. "I have spent years making myself small on purpose. I do not know that I know how to do anything else." "I am not asking you to be a duchess in the way she means it," he said. "Performed, polished. I am asking you to be exactly what you have always been, which is the only person who has ever told me the absolute truth without flinching. That is not something you need to learn. You have been doing it since the moment I met you." Cressida found a second opportunity at the opera the following week. Settling into the seat beside Adelaide during the interval with the easy confidence of someone who believed the seat was rightfully hers, regardless of who currently occupied it. "Still here, Miss Fenn," she said pleasantly. "How persistent of you." "I find persistence is generally rewarded," Adelaide said. "Sometimes." Cressida's smile did not waver. "Though I do wonder whether you have considered what happens once the novelty wears thin. Men like James are fascinated by something different for a season. It rarely lasts beyond that." "I should know. I waited rather a long time learning that particular lesson myself." "I am not aware that I am a novelty," Adelaide said. "I am aware that I am the only person who has told him the truth about his orchestra." "How charming," Cressida said, "to build an entire courtship on flat violins." "It has worked rather well so far," Adelaide said. Across the box, James returned from greeting an acquaintance, and his gaze found Adelaide before it registered Cressida's presence at all. Something in his expression cooled instantly, and he crossed the box to stand beside Adelaide's chair rather than take his own seat. "Cressida," he said, "I did not realize you required an escort to find your own box." "I wish to greet Miss Fenn," Cressida said. "We were having such an interesting conversation about novelty." "I am sure you were," James said, and the warning beneath the words was unmistakable. Cressida rose, gathering her shawl with practiced grace. "I shall leave you both to the second act, then." She paused at Adelaide's shoulder. "Do take care, Miss Fenn. It is a long way to fall from being noticed to being forgotten." She departed before either of them could answer. I and James sat down in the chair she had vacated, closer to Adelaide than the seating strictly required. "Ignore her," he said quietly. "I'm trying," Adelaide said. "Try harder," he said, and something in the dryness of it made her laugh, despite herself, and the tightness in her chest eased just slightly for the remainder of the evening. She found him in the library 2 nights later, papers abandoned, a single lamp burning low. "I've been thinking about Cressida," Adelaide admitted, settling into the chair across from him. "So have I," he said. "She was correct about one thing. I did once consider marrying her. It would have been sensible, suitable, precisely what everyone expected." "What changed?" "Nothing changed," he said. "I simply never felt anything beyond obligation, and I told myself that was sufficient, because I did not believe anything else was available to me. Then a woman behind a fern told me my flowers were poorly arranged, and I discovered I had been wrong about what was available." Adelaide's breath caught. "My father was a cold man," he said, quieter now. "He told me once that affection was a weakness suitable for poets and tenant farmers, not dukes. I believed him for a very long time. I built an entire life around not needing anything from anyone, because needing things felt dangerous, and I did not want to spend my life disappointed the way he had spent his." He paused. "I have not told anyone that. Not even Margaret." "Why tell me?" "Because I find I cannot seem to keep anything from you," he said. "It is rather inconvenient, and entirely the best thing that has happened to me." "I love you," he said simply, directly, the way he said most things. Not despite the fern or the criticisms or 6 seasons of deliberate invisibility, because of them. "You are the only honest thing in every room I have ever stood in, and I do not want to stand in another room without you in it. I have spent so long believing that being unnoticed was safer," Adelaide said, her eyes bright. "If no one looks at you, no one can be disappointed in what they find." "I have looked at you very carefully," he said. "I have found nothing remotely disappointing. I have found instead the only person I have ever wanted to be honest with in return." "That is not a very romantic thing to say," Adelaide said, though her voice had gone unsteady. "I'm not a romantic man," he said. "I'm a man who has fallen entirely, specifically in love with you, which I am told is a different thing, though it feels remarkably similar from where I am sitting." "Yes," Adelaide said. "Yes, what?" "Yes to all of it. The fern, the flowers, the wallflower who insulted your house and somehow ended up loving you anyway." He crossed the small distance between them and kissed her with a carefulness that told her everything Cressida's warning had gotten wrong. And outside, the rain continued quietly against the tall windows of Renfrew House. They married in early autumn, the wedding considerably smaller than society expected of a duke, exactly as he had insisted. Lady Cressida Hartwell sent a gracious card of congratulation, and was married herself the following spring to a viscount of considerable fortune and very little perception, and was rarely mentioned in Renfrew House again. 3 years later, the ballroom at Renfrew House is being decorated for its annual autumn gathering, and the Duchess of Renfrew stands at its center with a list in her hand and an expression of focused determination. "The roses are wrong again," Adelaide says. To no one in particular, though her husband is the only other person in the room. "They are the same florist as last year," James says, looking up from the doorway where he has been watching her work for several minutes without announcing himself. "Last year I was newly married and too happy to notice proportions properly. This year I have my full critical faculties restored." She gestures at the arrangement. "Look at that. It is leaning." "It has always leaned. You simply did not used to look." "I look at everything now," Adelaide says. "It is rather exhausting, being noticed enough that people listen when I point out the roses are leaning." He crosses the room and takes the list from her hands, setting it aside, and pulls her gently against him. "You complain," he says, "but I have watched you correct 3 vendors and rearrange the entire seating chart this morning with what I can only describe as genuine joy. It is satisfying, Adelaide admits, to be heard. From the doorway, their daughter's nurse appears, holding 18-month-old Eleanor, who reaches immediately for her mother with the absolute confidence of someone who has never once doubted she would be caught. "She wants you," the nurse says unnecessarily, since Eleanor has already made her preference entirely clear through volume. Adelaide takes her daughter, who immediately turns to survey the half-decorated ballroom with the same assessing expression Adelaide knows, with some amusement, that she has apparently passed on entirely. "She is judging the flowers," James says. "She has excellent taste," Adelaide says. "She gets that from me." "She gets the judging from you," James agrees. "I'm hoping the diplomacy comes from somewhere else entirely, because neither of us seems to possess any." Elena reaches a small hand toward the nearest rose arrangement and pulls one bloom slightly to the left with the unthinking confidence of a child rearranging the world to suit her. "There," Adelaide says, surveying the result. "Better." James laughs. The real laugh, still hers alone after 3 years, still the sound that undoes her every time. "I married the only woman in England who critiques flower arrangements while holding our daughter." "You married the only woman in England who told you the truth," Adelaide says. "The flowers are simply a symptom." Margaret appears in the doorway, considerably more fashionably dressed than she was 3 years ago, having married a baronet of her own, choosing the previous autumn, and acquired, in the process, an opinion about absolutely everything. "You are still adjusting the roses," she observes. "I told James when he married you that this household would never have a single moment of decorative peace again." "I have made my peace with the roses," James says. "I have not made peace with the orchestra. Adelaide has informed me the second violin is, once again, flat." "It is the same second violinist as 3 years ago," Margaret says. "He has had 3 years to improve," Adelaide says. "I remain hopeful, though increasingly less so." The Dowager Duchess arrives shortly after, leaning on her cane with the same brisk authority she has carried for as long as Adelaide has known her, and surveys the room with a critical eye of her own. "It looks considerably better than it did 3 years ago," she announces by way of greeting, "though I understand that is largely due to my daughter-in-law's insistence on inspecting every vendor personally." "Someone has to," Adelaide says. "James would happily let the orchestra play flat for the rest of his life if no one mentioned it." "I would notice eventually," James protests. "You would notice in approximately 4 years," Adelaide says. "I have done the calculation." The Duchess settles into a chair near the window, watching her son with the particular satisfaction of a woman who engineered an outcome and has never once regretted the meddling required to achieve it. "I told you the first time I met you that the things worth having generally require being seen," she says to Adelaide. "I do not believe I've ever been more correct about anything." "You are rarely wrong, Your Grace," Adelaide says. "It remains one of the more exhausting things about this family." "It is the only reason any of you are happy," the Duchess says, entirely unbothered by the observation, and reaches for Eleanor, who goes to her great-grandmother's lap with the easy confidence of a child who has never known a single person in this house to be anything other than delighted by her presence. He kisses her temple, and Eleanor babbles something at the roses that may or may not have been a further critique, and Margaret laughs shelves and the ballroom that once held nothing but a girl behind a fern and a duke who never smiled, now holds, instead, an entire small and very honest family, arranging the world exactly as they see fit. The end. Dear listener, perhaps you have spent years believing that being unnoticed was the safest place to stand, that if you kept your opinions quiet, your presence small, your wanting carefully contained, you would never have to face the particular ache of being overlooked by the people you hoped might see you. So you became very good at watching from the edges, at noticing everything while being noticed by no one, at telling yourself this was simply who you were, rather than a shield you built a long time ago and never quite learned to set down. Adelaide did not change to be loved. She was loved precisely as she already was. Sharp, honest, observant, unwilling to pretend a poorly arranged flower, was beautiful simply because pretending was easier. The only thing that changed was that someone, finally, was paying close enough attention to notice. If you are 40 or 50 or further along than that, and you have spent a lifetime making yourself smaller so that no one would have reason to be disappointed in you, hear this clearly. You were never invisible. You were simply waiting for the right person to look closely enough. Your honesty is not a flaw to be managed. Your noticing, your particular way of seeing the world, the things you have quietly observed from every room you have ever stood in. These are not the reasons you have been overlooked. They are the exact things worth being found for. Tonight, as you rest, let yourself imagine being seen exactly as you are, with nothing softened and nothing hidden. You may find, as Adelaide did, that this was always the only way that mattered. Sleep well, dear friend. Someone is watching more closely than you know. With love, from all of us at Fables of Love. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this story. If it made you laugh, cry, or believe in love all over again, we would be so grateful if you liked this video, left a comment, and subscribed to the channel. Sharing it with someone who loves historical romance means the world to us and keeps our storytelling corner alive. Another story is waiting for you at the end of this video. Click, listen, and let your heart be swept away once more. From all of us at Fables of Love, thank you for being here.